Okay, well, welcome everyone to this session that's being put on by CAN, being a charity trustee. It's something that we do 3 times a year, and we do this because it's very important, as it's one of the things that actually makes charities different from private sector and the public sector, because there are a group of you that have decided you want to do something, meet an urgent need in the community, and you do it for nothing. You don't do it for a job. It's not something you want to be paid for in terms of the private sector, and it's not something you have to do, like in the private sector for local government or the NHS or the police or whatever. It's because you decided you want to do it yourself. So we think it's important to provide advice and support to trustees. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute and about who I am. It's being put on by Community Action Network. Actually, all of your organisations are members, but we're basically a local charity based in Poole, but we provide services across Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole and the Dorset Council area. I principally work in BCP, and my colleague Becky, who's introduced and brought you all in, actually provides advice and support to groups in the Dorset Council area. And we want to see strong, healthy, diverse and vibrant, flourishing communities. And we do that through empowering the voluntary sector, provide advice and support on starting up and running a voluntary organisation, enabling volunteering, but that's principally focused on BCP, because in the Dorset area, you have volunteering Dorset. And then connected communities, which is about bringing people from the sector together to learn from each other, to express a view, and to have conversations principally with the statutory sector. This is me. I'm Steve Place. So as I said, I provide most of the advice and support to groups within Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. I'm not a trained lawyer. I'm not a trained accountant. I've been a trustee since I was 19. I'm now 66. I've worked either within the voluntary sector, or I've been supporting them if I've worked in the local authorities. So really, my knowledge is based by doing it and living and breathing the charity world. So I hope to bring, I guess, a bit of realism and pragmatism, because it's not just what the Charity Commission says, but I've actually had to try and interpret it. So that's my role. And although there is this training tonight, these are my contact details, and you can get me in contact with me best by email or by ringing the mobile number. And you, hopefully tomorrow or early next week, you'll get a copy of these slides, some more handouts, and a link to the recording for tonight. Being a trustee is very important because it's about working together to make a change. So each of your charities has got an urgent need that it wants to address. It'd be very different for some of you from the others, but you all have an urgent need. And being a charity trustee is about working together to help achieve that. So throughout this evening, I'm going to talk about the sort of individual responsibility, but also the collective responsibility of trustees as a trustee board. There's quite a lot of talk tonight. I'm going to try and get quite a lot in 2 hours, but ask questions as we go along. We'll put it into the chat, and there's going to be a chance for some other Q&A right at the very end. We're going to try and have a brief 10-minute break around 8ish, so that you have a chance to take a breath before I do the last bit. And this is what I'm going to cover, really. Hopefully you might have seen some of this in the blurb, about what's a charity, then what is a trustee and the legal responsibilities, people always ask me about, well, what's the risk? What's the liabilities? What could go wrong? So I'll touch on that a bit. Some pointers about how to be an effective trustee and the help and support from us, but also some national organisations that you can get some from. So the first thing I want to say is about what's the charity? Does anybody want to try and volunteer what they think, what makes a charity a charity?
Well, Steve, I got a bit of a legal background, so I know there are what are called charitable purposes under the law. So education, relief of poverty, that sort of thing. There are various themes, if you like, that
Okay.
qualify
Yeah.
for treatment as a charity.
Okay. Right. Okay. I'll touch on those in a minute. And anybody else got a view about what makes a charity a charity? Or be brave.
Seek to
Try.
make a profit.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
It's not a profit-making organisation.
Okay, I'll just ask you, what do you mean by profit?
I mean, money that goes into the pockets of the owners.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it's about what would happen, if you made more money than you spent, what happens to that money? Yeah. About not being distributed to people's pockets. Okay. Anything else that makes a charity a charity?
I should imagine there's something around the funding model, i.e. it has to develop its own funds from somewhere and how it's paid.
Okay, I'll come back to that in a minute. Anybody else? Any final views? I won't force it out of you. Yeah, it's one of those questions I always ask because everybody, you ask Jill or Joe Public and, oh yeah, I know what a charity is. I know what a charity is. But if you actually ask them, what does that mean? They quite often scratch their head. So they think they know what it means, but actually in English law, it's very, very specific. And as Steve says, I'll touch on those in a minute. But you as charity trustees need to understand a bit about what makes your organisation a charity, because part of your role is to make sure that it stays on the straight and narrow and actually stays being a charity and doesn't drift off into doing stuff that's not charitable. Because a charity must only do what Steve was talking about, charitable purposes. And we have a very sort of very rich background, like all English law. So a lot of it's unwritten. So it's called common law. And then you've got case law because they're in law, courts have made decisions. And then, of course, you've got parliamentary law, which has been passed. So for charities, our first act was around 1606 under Queen Elizabeth I. That was the first Charity Act. But probably first charities in England been around since probably 800s. And so there's this very sort of rich historical legal tradition. So what makes a charity is it's established exclusively for charitable purposes, which is what Steve says about. So there's about 13 of them. They're pretty broad, but it's true to say that not everything that's good for the community is necessarily charitable. And I guess for your charity, you need to just understand, well, which of the 13 purposes are you? So as Steve says, the old sort of like the one since the 1606 Act was the relief of poverty, relief of sickness, promotion of education, the promotion of faith. In fact, it was the Christian faith then. But since then, they've been added to. So there's about 13 others. There have been others now like promotion of racial harmony, promotion of the arts, and so on. So they've grown a bit. And the promotion of faith, well, what was promotion of Christian faith has now become a general one around the promotion of faith. So you just need to understand that. And as one of the handouts I'll be sending around is a brief description of those. And it operates for the public benefit. And that's one of the very important bits about a charity, is that it must benefit the public and not private individuals. Now, this is always going to be a bit of a judgment call about when it's public rather than private. So, for instance, if you were a charity that was set up to benefit people with a very rare condition, then you helping maybe 4 or 5 people a year, when there's only maybe about 15 or 20 diagnosed, would be fine. Whereas if you were only benefiting 5 or 10 when there would be potentially a couple of hundred people out there, then the Charity Commission might ask that question, why? Now, it would be fine if you haven't got enough resources to help those 100 or 200 people. But if it could be seen that you're only helping family and friends of charity trustees, then that becomes a big no-no. So charity trustees need to be aware of what public benefit, the difference that the work of the charity is making, and to be able to explain that. Should be able to explain it in the street. You know, you could try and get a couple of sentences agreed amongst your trustee board about the difference your work is making. But actually, you have to do this once a year, because each charity has to produce what's called a trustees annual report. And in that, it should basically say in the last year, what difference has your work made? So again, I'll send you another link that sort of like helps explain public benefit in a bit more detail. And the other thing is that it's under the jurisdiction of England and Wales, because charity law is different in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So if you ever look at the Charity Commission, it says Charity Commission for England and Wales. And that's fine for you. But if your organisation starts to operate in Scotland or Northern Ireland, then you probably would need to start thinking about how the charity law there is different. It's not going to be that different, but it'll be slightly different. But if you're just operating in England and Wales, you don't have to worry. And again, this is my reiteration, you know, charities exist to make a difference, to create public benefit. That's what they're about. And you as charity trustees have basically always got to make sure, one, that you are operating exclusively for charitable purposes, that you are producing public benefit, and that obviously you're following charity law as much as you can be. I'll say at this point, because I'll say it later on, but you're not expected to be an expert. You are all volunteers. You've got day jobs, you've got family lives. You're not going to spend hours poring over the Charity Commission and, you know, unpicking what the Charity Act says. What you're expected to do, though, is to ask the question, are we following this? If we don't know, we need to find out, so we need to ask someone. So you've always got to have ask those sort of questions about your public benefit and charitable purposes. Okay, and I'm going to send you this, what makes a charity, CC4. Luckily, none of you said because it's got a charity number. That's what not makes a charity a charity. There are plenty of charities that do not have a charity number. Do you know which are probably the largest group of organisations that are charities but don't have a charity number? Probably at least one in your neighbourhood. Where you live?
Church.
Oh, that's true. Churches. Yes, that's another one. Or some of them will have a charity number. The larger ones, you know, if they're over £100,000 income, then they have to be registered. But yeah, churches don't have to be. This is again a bit of the sort of, you know, English tradition. It actually only applies to Christian churches, whereas, you know, those of other faiths do have to. But in the past, the main denomination, so the Methodists, the Baptists, Church of England didn't have to. Independent Christian churches always had to register, but obviously mosques, boudoirs, and so on basically do have to. Sorry, so that's good call, Ron. And there's another one that's perhaps even more common. Okay, schools, all those academies, all those preschools, And even some of the old church schools, depending if they are, they're foundation schools, are all charities in law. But they don't have to register with the Charity Commission. They don't have a charity number. And we, of course, have a police force for it, which I've mentioned a couple of times, is the Charity Commission. As I said, it only covers England and Wales, and there are different regulators in Scotland and Northern Ireland. It's a non-governmental organisation, funded by the state. Interestingly enough, though, it is answerable directly to Parliament, not to a minister. So it has a sort of degree of independence, or supposed to have a degree of independence. Has been challenged in sometimes, depends, those of you who've been around for a while, whenever they appoint the chair, about whether they are, in the last few years, whether they've been Conservative supporters or not. But the Charity Commission does have these powers, so it's got to be sent certain information, has to be sent every year, and actually, if they request more information, you must cooperate and send that information. It can issue official warnings to tell a charity to do something or to stop doing something. And it has one of its sort of weapons is it can disqualify people from being a trustee or a senior employee of a charity from between 1 year to 20 odd years, depending on how severe the case of their misdemeanor might have been. And they can escalate it to something called a statutory inquiry, which you don't want that to happen, because then it becomes public. So you get told, I see, and in the local charity press, it gets splashed over about which charities are being investigated and why. And at the end of the inquiry, the inquiry report is produced. Its website is the place to go for definitive advice, about how to do stuff, but it's quite complicated because obviously they're trying to deal with. Does anybody have an idea about how many registered charities there are in England and Wales, roughly? Anybody want to pick up a number out of the air?
We've got to be in the thousands.
Yeah.
10,000? 10,000?
Yeah. It's about 176,000. But actually 50% of them, their income is less than £10,000. So the majority of registered charities are very, very small, tend to be very local charities. The big ones that we know about, are in the minority, the ones that you see, like Macmillan and Children in Need and stuff like that are and locally RNLI, are in the minority. And in fact, 80% of all charities have got an income of less than 100,000. So the Charity Commission, in a sense, is trying to give advice and support to people with a few £100 a year, compared with the RNLI, which is about 400 million a year in income. So their guidance can seem to be very turgid and very complicated, and very small charities sometimes feel that it's very much over the top. But it is the place. It's the first place you have to go to do. But the last few years they've been better at actually giving advice over the phone. Although if anybody's tried to do it in the last 6 months, they've probably had to wait at least an hour or more to be on the phone, because they moved over to a new online system in the summer for charities to do their reporting to, and it got clogged up. It's been a bit of a failure. But hopefully maybe in 6 months' time, they'll get back to being a bit more responsive, and they generally are very helpful. Although they are like the policeman for the police for the charity sector, they also try to be as helpful as they can be. And I just wanted to put this up, that it's good that we have someone like the Charity Commission, because there is an awful lot of public confidence and trust in charities. This is the latest survey from the Charity Commission. They do this every couple of years, where they ask people in the in the public, a representative sample, you know, between 0 and 10, you know, how much do you have trust and confidence in particular institutions? You know, NHS doctors always come towards the top. Charities have always been in the top 3 or 4. Last year, they came into number 2, 6.3. And I guess what I always love is that, you know, some of you have seen obviously that government ministers and the government sometimes have a good go at charities. And where are they on this list? Quite at the bottom. So I think it's important that we have the Charity Commission so it maintains that trust and confidence that the public have in charities. And basically the Charity Commission will get involved when it becomes obvious that a charity or individual trustees are actually stepping over the line of what makes a charity a charity. So it's a good thing that we have them there. Might be a pain, quite often you think about it, but actually for the sector as a whole, it is a good thing. Okay, before I go on to being a trustee, does anyone ask a question about what makes a charity a charity? No? Okay, well, leave it to the end, or you can always send me an email. So the next bit is about what's a trustee? Who is a trustee? Well, basically, once you know your organisation is a charity, then anyone who's on the governing management body, so that's the top committee that you have, then if you sit there and you have a vote, you're a charity trustee. Doesn't matter what you're called. So for schools, you might be called a governor. For some other institutions, you might be called a committee member. You might be even called very old charities might even be called a councillor, or you might just be called a trustee. But anybody around the table in law will become a charity trustee, regardless of what title they might have. And this word trustee is because it's trust law. It's that basically the law is saying it's trusting you to use the charity resources for its charitable purposes and to always act in its best interests. Okay, so that's the basic duty, is to ensure the charity is well run, okay, so that it's doing the work it should be doing, and that actually you're getting as many bangs for your bucks as possible. So your charity is about making a difference. Therefore, you should be making sure that all the money you have, all the people, any of the equipment, you're sweating it as much as possible to get as much benefit out of it. Obviously, it's solvent, you know, it's not going to become bankrupt. It's got enough money to meet all its liabilities. But also importantly, that actually it probably has got some money in its back pocket that if it has to close, it can close in a managed way. Now, particularly if the people you work with are vulnerable, or the land you're looking after is quite sensitive, you know, if you were to suddenly close down and just walk away, then that land or those people could be at risk. And charities have to be aware of that, so that you should try and, if you are going to close in a planned way rather than suddenly going bankrupt. You know, Wilko closing its doors, you know, in a couple of weeks. Okay, people lost their jobs, but it wasn't so convenient to go and buy nice cheap pots and pans and fiddly bits. But actually, nobody was really gonna be endangered by it. Whereas I said, if you're working with vulnerable people, or people are reliant on you, or you're looking after the environment, and you suddenly walk away, then there could be some damage. So therefore, you as charity trustees need to make sure that probably you aren't going to be in that position of suddenly closing. And the third thing is working towards its charitable purpose. And I'll talk about that a bit later on, because you need to be aware about what your specific charity's charitable purpose is. Downside is the buck stops with you. Okay, you know, you have to take ultimate responsibility. But just to say to you is that the Charity Commission and the courts all recognise that you are volunteers, that most of you, other than some of you might not know an awful lot about charity law and the way that charities run. So they will always make allowances for you. And even if it does go wrong, as long as you can show that you acted in good faith, you'll be fine. But you just have to recognise that actually, you know, you have the ultimate responsibility, and therefore you as trustees need to know enough about what's happening in your charity. A bit later on, I'm going to talk about this balance between governance and management. So, okay, you've got to be custodians to make sure the charity is working towards its goal and in the best way possible, but you don't want to micromanage people so they can't do their jobs. You have to step back, but you have to work out this balance between what I'm calling governance and management, so that you feel, you as charity trustees, knows what's happening in the organisation. Okay, the sort of basic document that the Charity Commission expects people to read is this thing, the Charity Trustees' Duties, the Essential Trustee, What You Need to Know, CC3. So there's a link there. Hopefully, because this is good practice, if you've become a trustee recently, your charity should have actually pointed you towards this document, because Charity Commission expects all trustees to probably at least read this and hopefully said they've understood it, and if not, to ask questions. But it's an okay read. Don't be put off. You know, if you download it, it's about 60 pages long, but actually there's tons and tons of space in it, and it's quite big text. It's not particularly dirge-like, so it's an okay read, but it sets out the most basic duties and responsibilities that you have as a charity trustee. I haven't put the link on this page, but towards the end, there are also links to these 5-minute reads that the Charity Commission have done, which are reads, but also little videos, and they're very, very good. They've started doing those in the last 2 or 3 years. But I'd recommend that all charity trustees look at those as well. Also, there was a trustee welcome pack that the Charity Commission used to send all new trustees, but it seems to be a bit more hidden on their website. But again, it's a sort of like 4-page summary of being a charity trustee. And then they've got this infographic here with these six duties on it, and I'm going to sort of like bang through these a bit and talk about them in a bit more detail. So the first one is ensure your charity is carrying out its purposes for the public benefit. So, you know, up to now, I've muttered about know about your charitable purposes, know your charitable purposes. Well, you need to think about what you can and can't do within your charitable purposes. Now, every charity will have something called a governing document. Now, that's its rules, its Bible. So it might be called a constitution, or it could be, if you're a charitable company, which some of you are, it might be called Articles of Association. And quite near the beginning of that document, there'll be something called charitable objects. And I'm going to put up one now. This is one of you here tonight. Do you know, does anybody recognise that as their charitable objects?
That's respected.
Ah, well done. Sorry not. I'll give you a prize if we were in the real room, but there you go. You can take some brownie points away with you. Yep. So this is for Charity Respected that works in Poole and Bournemouth. Now, each of your charity will have this, as I said, quite close. And if there's nothing else you don't know by heart from your constitution, you should know this, because every time you're asked to make a decision about what your charity should be doing, you should be asking yourselves, can we do this within our objects or not? So anything that Respected does has to be done within those objects. Now, can anybody think of something it can't do, looking at that?
not to be outside of Poole and Bournemouth area
Right. Okay. Yes. Except
and such parts.
yes. Read the next.
Yes, and such parts.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
be decided. The
But
main
where
area is Poole and
Bournemouth, but
Mm.
where can't they work? What geographical area can't they work in?
outside the UK, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, outside the UK. So if they suddenly got a saying, "Oh, come over to Calais," or come over. No, let's say, where could you go from Poole? You could go to oh, where's the ferry go through from Poole? In France.
St Malo.
Saint-Malo, yeah. So for instance, you know, they had a school in Saint-Malo said, "Can you come and work in Saint-Malo?" Then they couldn't do that. Okay. What about, okay, let's be very upfront. Would they be able to raise money for relief in Gaza?
Nope.
A lot of people would think that that's perfectly good thing to do, wouldn't they, as a charity, to raise money for overseas relief? But no, they can't do that within their objects. So this is where you have to be aware of what your object says. So something that you feel is needed or actually is probably charitable, you know, raising money for relief of those in need, could be. What could they do in Gaza though? No, they can't because they're outside the United Kingdom. Sorry, already stopped myself there. Yeah, so you have to be very, very aware. In fact, the Charity Commission, for instance, every time there has been like a big relief aid, so you know, obviously when there was the invasion of Ukraine, before that when we had the Afghan refugees coming over, from there the Charity Commission sent out, you know, a notice to all charities saying, yeah, you might feel it's very good to raise money for these people in need, but make sure you can do it within your charitable purposes, because it's not, then actually it could be the one time that charity trustees could become individually liable. Okay, that actually if you use charity money, that actually you could be asked to pay it back to the charity. Does everyone understand that about the charitable objects, charitable purposes?
Mhm.
Okay, yep. Okay. And then I think, as I said earlier, then you as trustees need to at least have some idea about how you're fulfilling its purposes and benefiting the public. So, you know, what activities you're doing and actually what difference that's making. So again, you know, like in smaller organizations, you're living and breathing because you're probably also the active volunteers doing the doing. But obviously in larger organizations, you might be a step back. You might have other volunteers and maybe even paid staff that are doing stuff. So you need to get reports back from them about what work's happening and how it's going. And then obviously something about, well, what difference that's making. And as I said, I think it's a good idea that, you know, you as a trustee board have like a little paragraph that everyone, a bit of spiel that everyone can say, okay, so what does Respected do? What does Planet Purbeck do? So that you all have like something very similar to say. But you also, once a year, have to formally do this in the trustees' annual report. And it's about, you know, what difference your charity is really making. It doesn't have to be, you know, scientific, statistical stuff. It needs to be, you know, it could be very simple surveys. It could be, you know, it could be videos, it could be photos, it could be little quotes from people you're working with, something that just actually, you know, gives a bit of evidence to those people who aren't involved day to day with your organization, that they can see what difference the charity work is making. So the next one is ensure your charity's governing document and the law. So this is about being familiar with your governing document. So whenever you look at Charity Commission stuff, they talk about your governing document. So this is going to be, as I said, it's going to be your constitution. I guess sometimes, very rarely, it could be called rules, or if you're a charitable company, it'll be articles of association. So you should all have a copy of it and roughly know it. I said the one thing you should know is the clause around the charitable objects, but have easy access to it. I think the Charity Commission several years ago did a survey and they found that 1 in 10 trustees didn't have a copy of their governing document, which is not right. Best thing to do is to shove it online, to be honest. If you've got a website, put it there, because it's a public document. anyone can request a copy of a charity's governing document from the Charity Commission, and they treat it as a freedom of information request. So they will send it to them. So it's not as if it's a secret. So maybe put it on your website so that then you as trustees know where you can get hold of it if you need to, rather than sort of like delving through drawers 5 years ago to find out when you were posted it when you started as a charity trustee. And certainly have it available when you've got meetings in case you need to just double check that the way you're going to run a meeting or the way decisions have to be made actually follow what's in the governing document. Because if you deviate from it, then any decision you've made is going to be null and void. And I've already said that you have to send certain things to the Charity Commission. It depends what sort of charity you are. All charities over £25,000 a year have to send their annual accounts, their trustees' annual report, and do an annual return. CIOs, charitable incorporated organisations, under 25,000 also have to do that, but smaller charities don't. So, for instance, Age Concern North Dorset, oh no, you're a CIO. Oh no, International Care Network, you're a charitable company. If your income was less than 25,000, you don't have to, but I know your income is more than that. Again, you don't have to do it. You'll delegate it to somebody, but you should be told that it's happened. And what you don't want to happen is for it to go in a late. So for the Charity Commission, you have to send these things in within 10 months of your year end. If you're a day overdue, you get what's called red flagged. So on the public register of charities, it has a date of when you sent in your annual return and your accounts and report. And if it's a day over, it goes red and it will stay there for 5 years. And the reason you don't want that to happen is that quite a lot of funders, one of their sort of first bit of due diligence is to see that you have kept up to date with your filing, because the Charity Commission says if charities can't do that within 10 months, then you should think about, is this a well-run charity and would you be giving money to them? So, be on the case and make sure that whoever's been given that responsibility, it might be a treasurer. If you're a bigger organization, it might be your chief exec or even a finance person. Or if you're working with an accountant, then it might be the accountant might do it. But you need to get confirmation from them, and it should be reported back to all the charity trustees, because at the end of the day, you're responsible, and the Charity Commission won't really accept any excuses. They did again a bit of research, I think it was about 5 years ago, about why people were late filing, and they got some of the classic examples, like literally a dog ate the accounts. Another one was I was going down the motorway and the back of the car flew open and all the paperwork flew out the back. But there were other ones that you probably felt were actually a bit more reasonable. Sadly, our treasurer died. The Charity Commission didn't accept any of those excuses. They said that the charity trustees should have had contingencies basically in place to deal with those sorts of things happening. And then, of course, being aware of other laws that apply to a charity. Okay, questions? What other laws besides charity law do you think apply to your charity?
Lots of things like data protection.
Yep.
Safeguarding.
Yep.
Have
any of you got staff?
Yeah.
So if you've got staff,
employers' liability.
Yeah, employment law, big headache.
Public liability.
Yeah. So your duty of care for people, so you'll have health and safety, and that's a good reason for having public liability insurance. So if anybody does have an accident and it was caused by you, your insurance company will be able to pay it out rather than you have to come out of the charity coffers.
In a way, you've got to think of it as if you're running a business.
Well, it is. It is. It is exactly that. It's you have to be aware. And again, this is where I was going to say my stuff here. You know, you're not expected to be an expert, but you need to ask those sorts of questions and to take steps to find out, and then make it happen. So, you know, there are a whole host of laws that apply to running any sort of organization, whether it's private sector or business, or whether it's in the public sector, or whether it's as a charity. So you need to be aware of those. You're all members, so you get lots of stuff from CAN, or one contact in your organization gets lots of stuff from CAN about changes in the law around charity law, employment, data protection, safeguarding, and stuff like that. So that's a good way of keeping up to date. Some of you might be part of national organisations like, I don't know if Age Concern North Dorset, you're probably plugged into Age Concern UK and probably get stuff around changes in the laws that affect charities. So again, you know, you might have one trustee who keeps an eye on that, or you know, you might rely on a chief exec or a manager to do that. But you as trustees very often just need to ask those questions. You know, are we keeping up to date with employment law? Or I noticed something in the press around the data protection stuff is changing, and have we found out what we need to do about that? So that's where you can sort of prompt people to go away and find out. The next one is act in your charity's best interests. So that was what I said at the beginning about what trust law is about. So really, it's about you as a trustee board making balanced, informed decisions and being prepared to question and challenge. So you know, things will come to you. Hopefully, someone's done some papers with pros and cons, or what the issues might be, and there are options. You might want to say, actually, well, why haven't we thought about this option? And then send someone away to find out a bit more. But you need to weigh it up in the balance, and then hopefully come to an informed decision. And that's why it's a good reason to have a good, strong, engaged board. I don't know how big any of your boards are. I usually say 5 to 9 is a good number. Anything lower than 5, then it's too easy to get groupthink. Everyone just nods through and is happy with it. Anything more than 9, then it sometimes can be difficult to actually have constructive debates without getting perhaps a bit of a sort of uncreative decision being made. And big thing in charity law is about accepting majority decisions. So hopefully decisions you will make will be by consensus. But actually, if you've got to a vote and the majority has it, then actually all trustees are expected to follow that. They shouldn't try and undermine it as soon as the meeting's over. They need to go along with it. If they're not happy with it and it's a deal breaker, then maybe they should think about moving away from the charity. However, if you think it's illegal, then you have a responsibility to probably whistleblow. So there was this thing about, I'm sure people have been in meetings where I want it minuted that I disagree with this. If you carry on being a trustee and then it turns out that decision was either invalid or even illegal, you are still held as liable as all the other trustees. So, you know, if it's really serious and even it's legal, you need to do something about it and not go along, and definitely not to try and undermine the decision afterwards. And it's about recognising and dealing with conflicts of interest. And you'll get another handout. That's what these H ones are on the thing. So you'll get this with the mailing. So all time you're going to have conflict of interest, and there'll be a whole section in your governing document about what a conflict of interest is and how you deal with it. And you have to follow those to the letter. There's also quite a lot of guidance on the Charity Commission website. So it's recognising that there will be a conflict of interest, particularly if it's going to involve a close family member, and it's called connected people. So it's actually your spouses, long-term partners. It'll be your siblings and their partners, it'll be your parents, your grandparents, and it'll be your children and your grandchildren. So if, for instance, you know, you as a charity want to employ somebody, you need to check first of all your governing document to see whether actually trustees can be employed. And if it says no, then you have to go through a process of dealing with that. There is a way of doing it, but you can't just employ them. Or if you want to have a contract with someone that's a close business partner where you own 50% of the business, then again there are rules about how you do it. So it's a thing that quite often goes wrong in charities. So you need to think a bit about it. I would recommend, and the Charity Commission recommends, that all charities should have a conflict of interest policy. That is, it'll mostly be quite standard, but it'll be a bit individualized to each charity, and particularly if there are clauses in the governing document. And that you probably ought to have something like a register of interests. Some of you might have come across that in other contexts, where it's a document where each individual lists, you know, what organizations they might have. Now, the interesting thing about charity law is it talks about conflict of loyalty. So conflict of interest is usually where there's going to be a material advantage, like money or business. But conflict of loyalty is where you might have a loyalty to one organization, which means that any decision you might make in your charity could be compromised. And actually, the appearance of it could be compromised. So, for instance, you might be the member of another organization that you're going to do some joint work with. And there might have been other people, other organizations you could have done that too. And it could be said, well, because you're a member of that organization, that's why the trustee board said yes to you working with that organization. So the appearance is just as important as the actuality. I usually say it's the tabloid test. If the Echo got hold of it and could make a story out of it, then probably you've got to think of being squeaky clean and dealing with it. And the easiest way you deal with most conflicts of interest is that the person involved actually doesn't have any involvement in any of the decision. So, for instance, you know, if that item comes up on the agenda, the minutes say that that Ron's got is a trustee or is an owner of this organisation, he has a conflict of loyalty. Basically, he stepped outside of the room, and then the minute goes on to talk about the decision of the rest of the board. That's done, and then the next item, it says Ron came back and rejoined the meeting. So there's a record of who had the conflict of interest and how it was dealt with. So something to look out for. And then trustee benefits are allowed. Because this rich tradition, there is still quite a Victorian view about charity trustees, that they should be doing it, you know, because of, you know, good for the soul and good for other people. So basically it's felt that trustees shouldn't get any benefit from a charity. Obviously things have moved on from there. So for instance, you know, in the old days, a charity trustee couldn't be a beneficiary, so they couldn't be a user of the charity themselves. So there'll be Lord and Lady Bountiful, you know, who would be coming in and looking after the deserving poor. But obviously there are lots of charities where you want users to be involved. But your governing document needs to make that clear that that is possible. Some will say that all the trustees could be beneficiaries, as long as they don't get anything more than anyone else. But some might say that as long as they are in a minority. So you need to check that in your governing document. So some will say, you know, less than half can actually be beneficiaries and users. So for instance, the Vale Pantry, you know, so you could have, depends what your governing document says, but you'd have to check to see actually how many of your users could be a trustee on your charity board. But there might be other things that the trustee benefits are. All trustees can claim legitimate expenses of being a charity trustee. So that could be travel. If you were coming a long way, it could be accommodation. It could be perfectly okay, for instance, to claim carer costs. But again, there should be a policy about what is allowable or not allowable for trustee expenses. Okay. And it's not about preserving the charity for its own sake. That's that, you know, in a way, charities are trying to do themselves out of a job. You know, if the need was, in the perfect world, if the need was met, then you wouldn't need to exist. I know for a lot of what you do, you know, they're very wicked long-term problems. They're not going to disappear in the next 5, 10, maybe 100 years. But actually, it's not always about thinking about just keeping your charity going for its own sake. It's as long as there is a need and that you're meeting whatever that need is. And it's not about serving personal interests. You know, you as charity trustees, when you're in that room, you've always got to think about what's best for the charity and try and avoid your own personal interests, or to try to put to one side perhaps the that you don't get on with Joan who's sitting next to you. You know, you basically, as charity trustees, need to work together in the best interests of your charity and those that it's benefiting. Okay, the next one is it's about using your charity resources responsibly. So it's managing risks. Again, this could be back of the fag packet stuff. Again, you need to ask those sorts of questions. You know, what can go wrong in the charity, and actually how can we best manage them or prevent them or to mitigate them? Someone's already mentioned about, obviously, public liability insurance is an absolute for all organisations, just in case someone has, you know, can say that the damage they experience was because of your negligence. And it's protecting the assets. So again, you know, for instance, if you own something that's quite a lot of money, you should make sure you've got adequate insurance against fire and theft, for instance. But reputation is very important. Most of you are probably relying on stuff being donated to you in one way or another, and that's only going to happen whilst you've got a good name. So you need to protect your reputation as much as possible. And obviously managing the people. So that's going to be volunteers and staff for the larger ones of you that can employ people. And we already talked about the employment law is maybe a big thing to be aware of. It's about getting the resources your charity needs. Now, this is you doing big picture stuff. It's not about you going out and rattling buckets or doing funding applications, but you as a board need to have like a budget. You need to be aware about, well, how much money do we need for the year ahead? What's our plan for getting that money, and who's going to go and do it? And how often are we going to ask them to report back? So you might say that you've got to raise, you know, £25,000 this year. Where's that going to come from? Well, some of it will come from sales. Some of it might come from individual donations. And we're going to do some community fundraising, and some of it's going to come from grant applications. So, and you've got an idea about who's going to do that, and actually what resources do they need to make that happen. You know, like putting off community fundraising is not going to happen without some money being spent on promotion, publicity, of any of the paperwork that needs to be put in place and so on. So you need to ask those questions, that it's all happening, but you might not necessarily do the doing, the managing. Now, in smaller charities, the trustees probably are going to do a lot of the day-to-day stuff. But I would say to you that you're wearing two hats. You're wearing a volunteer hat, and you're sometimes wearing a trustee hat. And you try and keep the two separate, and be aware about when you've got your trustee hat, which is about the long-term strategic stuff. And when you're doing the day-to-day as a volunteer, this is day-to-day operational stuff. Not always easy to separate them, but try to segment it so that, for instance, your trustee meetings don't become really management meetings, like, you know, organising the rota for next week or arranging for the next fundraising day. But the trustee meetings need to be talking about long-term budgets, policies and procedures, and so on. And of course, you know, one of the things that trustees sign off is about having policies and procedures in place so that everyone knows how to behave, how to do things, so you're consistent, and it's not being made as you go along. But it's also a way of you delegating it. You know, as I said, you know, the buck stops with you, but you can't be everywhere all the time. So the way to show that you've discharged your duty is that you have agreed these policies and procedures and you've made everybody aware of them. This won't be appropriate for, well, some of you a bit more than others, but actually if you get involved with anything with land and buildings of more than 7 years, there are quite specific rules for charities that are different from public sector or private sector. So block that in your head. Anything that's going to involve land or buildings of over 7 years or buying and selling, then there are very special rules. And again, that's where you would need to get a charity lawyer probably involved. And as I said, you have responsibility for it to staff and volunteers. And the thing I'd throw out to you here as trustees is that obviously, you know, you've got people who are helping the charity do its day-to-day work, and there'll be maybe a mix of staff and volunteers, and you probably would like them to be treated equally and in the same way. However, because of employment law, you need to make sure you don't end up treating volunteers as employees, because they will get employment rights. And again, you'll probably say, oh, nobody's going to take us, but actually volunteers have gone to employment tribunals and have won, basically that they were unfairly dismissed, for instance. So you need to treat, you have policies and procedures slightly differently for staff and volunteers. Now, you are members of CAN. Another part of CAN is the Volunteer Hub, and they have an awful lot about actually how you should treat policies and procedures for volunteers. If you're in Dorset, then you go to Volunteer in Dorset, Dorset Volunteering Centre. Is that what it's called, Becky?
Yeah, I always get it round the wrong way around. Dorset. No, it's Volunteer Centre Dorset.
Volunteer Centre Dorset, yeah. They'll give you that similar expert advice and support. Again, you know, you might not have to do it, but you just need to maybe ask the questions. You know, are we making sure we're not treating our volunteers as employees? Okay. Anybody want to ask any questions at that point? No? Okay. I make it 8 o'clock, 10 past. Have a 10-minute break. Yep. Okay, we're back in at 10 past.
Thanks.
Becky, there's somebody in the waiting room. Becky, did you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I was unmuted. Do you want to let them in for the last hour?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Oh, Doug, your hand's raised.
Okay. So I'm familiar with being a director of a company and where you have employees and responsibilities that you have for that, and making sure that everything going well with that. The experience I don't have and don't understand really is, so for example, we've got all these responsibilities. How do we know, for example, for argument's sake, we have a volunteer who goes rogue, and presumably that's I haven't got experience of that, but you know presumably there are suggestions on how we can
hello, Doug.
manage that situation.
Doug?
Sorry, can't you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Hello, Doug.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, Doug. He's just stepped away.
Ah, okay.
Also be aware, currently we are still recording. So no names or confidential or.
No,
Oh.
no,
Sorry, Doug. Sorry, Doug.
no.
You
So
back?
my question is really, we've got all these responsibilities, but if you're a volunteer just coming in ad hoc, you don't have those same responsibilities. How do you, is there another course on how to manage those to make sure that we can make
Oh,
those?
volunteering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, if Becky's still on the line, she might have gone for a break. But I'm sure.
No, I'm still here.
Yeah, you are. So I'm sure Volunteering Centre Dorset do courses on volunteer management, don't they?
Okay.
Yes, they do.
That's probably
do.
where I need to go then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Doug,
so-
we've got your email. I'll introduce you and
Lovely, thank you.
signpost you to Vicky Hall. Okay.
Lovely, thank you. Excellent.
All right. Okay. Good.
So guys, let's
Yeah. Have a break.
go and have a break because Steve's talked for a while. So let him go and get a drink, and we'll be back at about 10 past, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Vicky, actually, are you still in in the ether? Can you hear me okay? And can you see the PowerPoint okay? You're on mute, Vicky, and you've just gone off yourself. Are you okay? Can you see the PowerPoint and hear us all right, Vicky?
Hi, is that Steve? Are you the one of the organisers? Hi, Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm sorry, I can just see your can. So you're one of the organisers. It's
Yes.
Vicky. I just wanted to give my apologies. I
Yeah, I saw
totally
that.
got waylaid, so I just didn't. I missed the whole of the first hour.
Yeah.
So, is it on record or something? Can I?
Yeah. It's been paused at the moment, but yes, I know actually it's still going. But yes, after tonight, you'll get a copy of the slides, some handouts, and then a link to the recording.
Okay, so sorry.
That's all right.
What it's like. I was doing other stuff, and I suddenly look. Oh no, I should be on this Zoom call. But there you
That's
go.
okay.
Okay.
Okay. So
Thanks.
no worries. It'll probably be. It might be tomorrow, but if not, it's probably early next week. You'll get an email.
That's fine. Cheers.
Okay. But we're pausing till about 10 past. That's when we
Yeah,
start
that's
again.
cool.
Okay.
I picked up on that one.
Good. Okay. Good. Well, enjoy the rest of the 50 minutes once we get started.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about disappearing earlier on. I had a loose moose about this hoose.
With all your cats, they're not doing their job properly.
Well, they're indoor cats, but they have access to sort of an outside greenhouse. And all of a sudden, she was shouting and shouting and shouting one. And then my son realised what the shouting meant, and she brought it in for me, of course, as well.
Oh, yeah, a little present. Yes.
Yeah, alive as well.
Gotta love them when they do that.
Not very often, as I say. Oh my God.
Yes, I always get suspicious, isn't it, when you suddenly see a whole bunch of blowflies suddenly appearing in your room and thinking, oh my God, I've missed that one, didn't I?
Yeah. But they don't have to make a noise. All right, guys, are we all back? And Vicky, you're present. Lovely. Can you hear and see the PowerPoint? Okay, Vicky, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
No problem.
Missing the first hour. I just had a quick word with Steve, and I believe you'll be sending out the PowerPoints and so forth later on. So
Not a problem. And just to, if you didn't see the chat, Vicky, we are recording the session, and so you'll be able to rewatch it.
That's cool. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Doug, you've still got your hand up. Was that from?
Yeah, I've got another question, just a very quick one.
Yeah.
Can an employee be a trustee?
It depends on what your governing document says.
Okay.
If
there might be conflicts of loyalty then?
Well, it'd be conflicts of interest. So obviously, if they were an employee, then if there was any discussion about pay or conditions of service, then obviously they'd have to step outside the room.
Okay.
And that can work for connected people as well. So the charity that I'm a trustee for, which does before and after school care and holiday care. One of the play workers is the wife of one of the trustees, and our governing document says that they couldn't be an employee, but to do so we had to get express permission from the Charity Commission. So you have to basically say why it's in the best interest of the charity to do so. And the argument we used was that we openly advertised the vacancy. We shortlisted 3 and interviewed them. She scored best on the day and therefore was obviously the best person for the job, and that her husband was not involved at any point in the selection and recruitment process and won't be involved in any discussion around pay and conditions of service. So even though she wasn't a trustee, he steps out of the room. And like I said earlier, our minutes always record that. But you need to check what your governing document says, and I know you're converting to a CIO, so you can talk to Becky about that, because you're on that side of the border. Okay, all right. Okay, let's crack on. So we'll finish around 8. So the next one is about acting with reasonable care and skill, and so it's using your skills and experience. But basically, the courts of the Charity Commission would think about it's the same that we'd use for looking after your own affairs, but they expect you to at least do that, but not less. Just you can't turn around and say, well, actually, it's not my money. It wasn't my equipment and stuff. You've got to treat it almost as if it was your own and use that same care and attention. But it's about knowing where the limits of your knowledge are and deciding when you need advice. And you might get that from a national organisation, or we're always a good first point of call. We probably could help you in most bits of queries that you've got, and if not, we'll tell you where to go to get it. So come to us first. We're free at the moment, so do that while you can. I guess it's about taking time to prepare for meetings. That being a charity trustee isn't just about turning up at the meeting. Hopefully you should get some agenda and papers maybe a week before is a good thing to aim for, that you read them through, you have a think about what questions you might have, and maybe even start to take a view about what decision you might support. But it is about being an active trustee. So it's about getting the information you need, financial and management, particularly financial. In my experience, and all the research says that most charity trustees really want to offload all the financial stuff onto somebody else, like the treasurer. That's not fair on them because it's a lot on their shoulders. But actually, it's you not stepping up to your responsibilities, because actually the financial management is an equal responsibility of all trustees. So if you feel unconfident or unsure about financial reports, then you need to have an open conversation with whoever produces your financial reports to make them live for you, make sense to you. Like for instance, I have seen obviously people turn up with spreadsheets with lots of figures on them, for instance, which obviously people just glaze over, and I don't think that's good practice. Really, there should be text to explain and probably to point out the important areas for trustees to think about. Where have we got money that we can do something with, or where are the problems that we're overspending, and therefore we're going to have to think about actually how we find some savings or raise more money to cover those costs. So as well as the figure work, there should always be some written explanation, particularly pointing out where trustees need to perhaps think about making a decision. Why is it? Oh, sorry. And it's about being prepared in case something goes wrong. Again, who would have thought about COVID? Who would have thought about cost of living? All these things suddenly will come out of the left field. But, every now and again, just sit down and think of some pretty obvious things. What accidents could go wrong? If any of you are involved in stuff that could have, could result in some sort of dangers or harm to people, then think about actually what your response will be. Putting your head in the sand and doing nothing is never a good strategy. So it's about thinking through those. It's going to be different for different charities and the way you work, but just think about the most obvious things that could go wrong and what you'll do in those situations. It's
So,
about
Is it a good idea to actually have a risk register and sort of
it depends how complicated you are. Risk register is an obvious thing to do. Have a contingency stuff. Then you might have, like, for instance, you might have a policy about what happens if the press gets in contact with you, about actually it's very clear who's going to talk to them, and maybe actually what who will agree the messages that will go out. It's going to be different for each charity. You just have to think about I guess the worst case scenario and actually what you should have in place
Yeah.
That
But you're not
that
saying
will
there's
help.
any specific requirement that you must do this and you must do that. You're just saying
Well, yeah,
just
yeah.
your
Yeah, the,
approach it.
no, the Charity Commission, you know, if you're a bigger charity, I think over half, you've got 500,000 a year, then the
Yeah.
Charity Commission wants you
I
to
wish.
actually mention risks in your trustees' annual report. But again, they don't tell you because each charity is so very different and the risks can be different. They just need you to think through that. And if any of you want to develop that, you know, Becky and I have got templates or toolkits that will help you think about the different areas that might be relevant to your charity. But you have to, as trustees, think about your specific charity, who it's working with, and the way it works, the activities it does, because they're all going to generate different types of risks.
Okay, thank you.
So meeting your legal requirement, reporting requirements. So as I said, you know, Charity Commission expects you to do stuff. If you're a charitable company like ICN, yep, you'll also have to report to Companies House. If you're doing if you're in a regulated activity of some kind, you might have to report to Ofsted. You might have to report to oh, I've forgotten about the Care Quality Commission, for instance.
CQC.
Yeah, CQC. So it depends if you're registered anywhere, then you might actually obviously have to do some other reporting and standards or whatever, depending on what your registration is. And it's about being able to show your charity complies with the law and is effective. That's why minutes are very important. I know that's a whole thing for another session, but we've got some advice. We're going to be developing some advice and support on our website about good minute taking. They don't have to be war and peace. They don't have to be a blow-by-blow discussion. They should be a summary. And the more detailed is dependent on how important or sensitive the decision might be, so that it gives a very clear idea about why trustees made the decisions that they did do. Be accountable to members and others with interest in the charity. Some of you will have members that you're answerable to, and therefore you'll probably have AGMs that you have to do reports to. But there might be others with an interest in the charity, stakeholders like your funders, for instance, probably quite importantly, and you'll have to report to them. But you might want to keep them engaged and updated with the work you're doing, even when you've stopped getting money from them, because you're likely at some point to go back to them when you are able to do so. So keep them engaged and up to date with what you're doing. And obviously, like, you know, you aren't there 24/7, so there are going to be staff and volunteers that are doing the day-to-day. So you need to make sure that they know and that the system's showing that they are accountable to you. I guess in most organisations, there will be like a manager of some kind that will actually manage everyone else day to day, and they will report to the trustee board. But it needs to be clear that actually everyone that's working, whether it's paid or volunteering, that they are answerable to the board of trustees, and the reports go to them about what work's happening. And it's about welcoming on accountability as an opportunity, not a burden. This is what I said about earlier about the Charity Commission, is that it's great they're there, so that actually it keeps all of us on the straight and narrow, and can deal with the rotten apples as they turn up. You know, there's enough of bad practice that happens in the private sector and probably even the public sector, and charities need to make sure that they're squeaky clean. And it is a bit unfortunate that actually we are held to higher standards than probably the private or even the public sector. But that means then that we have to keep on our toes really and make sure everything's done the right way. And I know this looks like there's an awful lot of stuff to take in and to know how to do, but it's like being out in the road. You know, we go out and we automatically know what to do about what side of the road, what do those signs, what do those things on those markings on the road mean? What do those signs mean that are up? Who has right of way? What can I do here? What can't I do here? You know, the more you do it, the more it becomes second nature. And the same is true about running a charity, is the more you think about it, the more it will just become part of your second nature. So don't be put off and scared. So, hopefully most of you can remember the first time you ever got in a car and thought, my God, you know, what have I let myself in for? But probably just do it now second nature. So don't be put off by all this detail. You don't have to get it right now. You just need to keep asking your questions about, is this the right way? Is there a better way of doing it? And changing as you stay as a trustee for longer. Anybody want to ask me any questions about those roles and responsibilities I've gone through very quickly? Okay, I did say at the beginning that quite often, you know, people ask me about, well, what's the risk or liability of being a charity trustee? Well, this is the nice bit. Really, in all cases, financial liability were met by the charity, and that's very clear about charity law. And here's a quote from that CC3 document, you know, the essential trustee, where it actually says that the Charity Commission knows that you're volunteers and that you will probably make honest mistakes. And as long as you've acted honestly and reasonably in good faith, even if it's wrong, you'll be told, don't do it again, but nothing will come back to haunt you. There might be rare cases where trustees may face personal liabilities. Earlier on, I talked about if, for instance, you end up using charity resources outside the charitable objects, that could be an occasion where you might be asked to might be asked to pay it back. Rare. It would only be really when the Charity Commission thought you did it knowingly. Trouble is, now you've been on this training course, you now know you can't necessarily go and raise money for Gaza unless your objects allow you to. But ignorance can sometimes be a good thing. But basically, it's those times, or it could be stuff where, for instance, it's pretty obvious. If a plumber says, "I'll come and fit your leaking sink. Oh, pay me in cash," and you'll do that maybe as a householder, but you all know that that's illegal because that's tax evasion, basically. If you did that as a charity trustee for your charity and you get found out, then HMRC will probably fine you. Charity Commission might then turn around and say, well, actually, you knew you shouldn't pay people cash in hand, and therefore you should pay the fine out of your own pocket. Okay. So it's going to be very rare occasions, and as I said, it'll be when the Charity Commission has got good evidence that you knowingly did it. Very, very rare, though. Very, 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 very rare. So there are some ways of minimizing the risks. It's knowing what's been done in your name. Like, for instance, charity trustees are all equally responsible. So if you've got somebody going off, speaking on behalf of your charity, you should pretty understand what they're going to say on your behalf. Yeah, for instance. I've already talked about, why policies and procedures are good. It's a way that you can make everyone aware, this is how we look after the money. This is how we protect the people that we're looking after. This is how we make sure that the data we keep on individuals is kept safe. So as long as you can show that you've got these policies and procedures, you regularly reviewed them, you kept them up to date, that you could show that you made everyone aware of them, an email, or if you've got like a shared document folder that they're there for volunteers and staff to do, then that's fine. Individuals, can decide not to use money in a particular way or to do something with data, but then that comes down to them, not your responsibility. Sorry. And there's this catch-all, always act honestly and reasonably within your governing document. As I said earlier, always review it, look back to make sure. Over the years, sometimes organisations sort of have this they know how to run meetings or how to do decisions, but actually if they go back and look at their governing document, they find in fact it's not how they should be running them. So always go back to them, and if it's not working for you, you change them. But it's the governing document is your Bible, and until you change it, you've got to do it that way. And you know, as I said earlier, you know, recognizing where you've got limits and getting professional advice when you need it. Insurance, I've already mentioned, is obviously a pretty common way of mitigating against risk, you know, against viral theft or injury. And the more complicated or the more risky activities you do, the more insurance you might take out. Some of your organisations might have trustee indemnity insurance, which is to help to cover individual liabilities. But you need to look at the policy. Some it's like any insurance, you pay for what you get. But it's something that some charities might want to consider and talk to you need to talk to a specialist charity broker. You won't get this from any good advice from a high street broker. You have to be somebody who specialises in charity. There are plenty of them around. The other pretty obvious way is incorporation. Is there somebody here from Bournemouth U3A?
Yeah, Stephanie.
Stephanie. Okay. All the rest of you are actually incorporated charities. This is mean where your charity has a legal identity that's separate from the individuals. So it's the difference between being a company and a sole trader. So if a sole trader goes down the tubes owing money, then actually anybody they owe money to is quite within their rights to go after that person's own property and things that they own, their own cash, their own house and property like that. Whereas if you're a company, you go down the tubes, as long as nobody can show that you built up a debt knowingly, then actually they can whistle, you know, like Wilko, for instance, you know, closing down, owing squillions, and then people saying, well, actually the family took loads out, but nobody's turned around saying that was illegal. So CIOs, charitable incorporated organisations, and companies limited by guarantee are incorporated. So actually, any of the debts and any of the legal liabilities are in the name of the charity. Whereas for Bournemouth U3A, you're unincorporated, which means that the trustees are a collective group. It's really interesting. I had a quick look at some other U3A charities, and I can see that they were all unincorporated. So I guess the national body has some sort of view. It's fine if you don't get involved in long-term agreements, so not employing staff, perhaps not taking on buildings where you're going to have a long-time liability or that you could end up in court. But I usually, and I think Becky does the same, would always ask charities that once you've got to a particular size, you should think about incorporation.
So typically we don't have buildings, we hire buildings.
Yeah.
So typically we don't have them, but sometimes U3As around the country, there's over 1,000 individual charities do have them. But I think that the main thing is that we have like UK-wide insurance cover.
Yeah, I thought maybe the national body probably has some pretty good insurance cover for the trustees. Yeah.
It does. I think so. So we obviously rely on that. But I think the other very important thing is we are an educational institution in the sense that we deal primarily with older people, 50 plus. So we're providing the charitable resources to the public, and so therefore we don't need to. The key point I wanted to say. So we are the biggest educational movement that is run 100% by volunteers for volunteers. So we employ nobody. The only trust that employs people is at the centre, which is a separate trust. The Third Age Trust is separate, but the 1,000 individual charities like ourselves, we just don't. employ anybody.
Yeah,
So
I
I
thought
suppose we're
probably.
lucky in that
Yeah,
sense
yeah,
that
yeah.
you haven't
Is
got
it-
the conflict there.
Yeah, and I probably would have been a bit more concerned if you were like a small independent charity not linked to a national body, and if you started employing staff or having services where you're locked into rents for a while and you had a bit of a shaky income, so that your charity could go down the tube and owe money, and then that.
But we have a huge amount of guidance being provided from the centre. And when you were talking about policies and procedures, and I've only been a chair since last October of this charity, that they actually give you guidance. There's a list of about 20 different policies, but they're saying, but these are the core 6. You must have these policies in place. So they give you all the guidance and nice to have and all that. So
good. That's
it's
good.
really helpful.
Good. Okay. But I'll send you the everyone will get the handout so you understand that.
Steve,
Yes.
I'm not sure whether to say that maybe minimizing risks for your first one there around making sure what people are doing in your name with regards to prevent duty. And because we all run events and have speakers, and people always recommend speakers if you're sometimes a charity and you're holding events, just to be aware of what they're going to say in your name because of that.
Yeah, although actually prevent duty doesn't cover us, because the prevent duty is just a public institutions. But you're right, there is this expectation in the wider thing around I guess terrorism and hate speech. That actually it's expected, the Charity Commission does say this very strongly, that if you have got speakers, there might be nothing to do with your, if you have outside speakers coming in, you have a responsibility to make sure that actually those speakers are acting within the law. And there have been cases of charities that the Charity Commission have taken to task. So they've had a statutory inquiry of where they've had speakers in who are contravening the law against equality, or it could be anti-terrorism legislation. So sometimes, as similarly, even like you, Stephanie, for educational stuff, for instance, you have a duty to make sure that the people that are coming doing your tutoring are actually doing, in a sense, educational as opposed to informational, and that actually as part of the educational thing, they've got to give people options. You know, there have been educational charities that, again, that the Charity Commission have taken to task, because education, they say, is that people should make up their own minds. It's not about indoctrination. So just for the matter of interest,
two key things. Sorry, we have 2 key areas that we just do not touch, and that's religion and politics. Not allowed.
But the same could be true, for instance, about, if you had someone coming in to talk about talk about health, for instance, and looking after yourself, and if you had somebody who came in and, for instance, only gave the view, for instance, that homeopathy was the only way to work, then the Charity Commission would take a dim view of that, because they're saying that that's not giving a range of options for people to choose from. So for instance, this is not me being political, but there was a charity that was set up basically to promote coming out of the EU, that was set up as an educational charity, and the Charity Commission took them to task because they were only putting forward the view that we must come out of Europe. They said that was not correct. Now, if they set themselves up under another head, they probably would have got away. But because it was under the educational purposes, that was it. So you as charity trustees sometimes might have to think about actually, depending on your charitable purposes, what cannot do. So again, for instance, in the health sector, they're now saying that alternative medicine is not charitable, but complementary medicine is. So if it goes alongside, NHS type medicine, that's okay. But if you were just promoting alternative medicine as a way of treating or dealing with illness, then the Charity Commission is saying that's not charitable.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Good comment.
Anyway, but Becky and I here, if people want to talk about their individual charities and this, come back and ask us.
Thank you.
So the basic principle, really, that I've said, is that you always act in the best interest of your charity and its beneficiaries. And if that's the one thing you take away from tonight, that's great. And if every time you're asked to make a decision, you feel you can justify to yourself and somebody in the street that that's why you made that decision, you'll be fine. And even if it's wrong, the Charity Commission will just say, well, actually, that wasn't probably the right decision to make, but you did what you thought was the best in the circumstances and with the information you had. So it's very, very unlikely that actually you will face a risk of anything. But if you act knowingly, not in the best interest of the charity, or illegally, you will be liable. So, for instance, a treasurer was jailed a couple of months ago for stealing over £100,000 of donations. Basically, the Charity Commission investigated it and then obviously passed the information to the police, and there was a successful conviction. And then they investigated. Oh, I love this. There was a single trustee remaining, so that was against the governing document because you need to have at least two. But he spent £110,000 of the charity's money, basically furnishing the charity that he owned, the cottage he owned, claiming basically it was used for the charity, but there was no evidence that it was being used for charitable activities, and also that he had bought 2 antique Mulberry long case clocks, which was an investment for the charity, but just so happened to be on display in his cottage that had been refurbished. So basically, the Charity Commission, basically made him pay all that money back, and then disbarred him for 15 years from being a charity trustee in the future. So it does happen, and people who read my, I do one of the newsletters I do every week is Know Your Stuff, is I put these little cases in to show that actually the bad apples can be found out and be dealt with. I think the one quality that I would say is for you to have the courage to ask the seemingly stupid question. Those of us with a, white Anglo-Saxon background basically just sit there in silence and we think about and we steam away, and then outside of a meeting we might go away and, oh, why didn't we ask? Why didn't that happen? Why aren't they doing that? You really need to step up and probably ask what would be the seemingly stupid question, because more often than not you'll find that other people in the meeting were also having a very similar query. So don't hold back. Charity Commission have this quite interesting infographic. You probably can't see it very big on the screen, but you'll get a link to it on the Charity Commission website. Some things are more pertinent than others, like asking about where you're investing your money, what are we doing about safeguarding, and that. So there's about 15 questions that are good prompts, for you to consider as a trustee board, maybe every couple of years, not all at the same time, but spread across it. Being curious, I think the most important is being curious. I keep on saying it's about asking questions so you get a better understanding about what your charity is doing it, how it's doing it, why it's doing it. Asking questions like, have we thought about all the legal consequences and stuff having in place? So it is asking those questions. So it's not just turning up to the meetings. It's probably thinking about actually what you've read or maybe even seeing the charity doing, and asking questions about how and why. Bit of pointers on being an effective trustee. There are probably some key documents that you should have. I've already mentioned that governing document, constitution, or articles are probably very important to have. You'll get a handout with a list of them. Some of these you might have, some you might not. And hopefully I'm being put over that if you're a trustee, you need to take part. You can't just, you can't just be a prisoner or a passenger. You can't just sit there coming up to the meetings and just sitting in the seats and warming them. Sometimes people feel they're a prisoner, because basically, their best friend asked them to come along to fill the spot. You don't want to upset them by walking away, so you feel an obligation to be there, so you're a prisoner, or you are a passenger. As I said, just warming the seat. You need to take an active part, and it's to protect yourself as well, because if things do go wrong, then you will be equally responsible and liable with everyone else. And obviously, if you're taking up a place, then it might be excluding somebody, or it's taking time and energy for the charity to keep you informed and engaged, and you're not really contributing much. And I think a key question is that, you know, whenever you're asked to, you know, will this help us deliver our charitable purpose, and is it the best way? Quite often charities will carry on year in, year out doing the same thing. Things have moved, you know, things have moved on in society or technology, and there could be better ways of doing it. It's interesting, you know, COVID, you know, like for instance, before COVID, I used to do these meetings all in person, you know, 3 a year. And we kept on umming and ahhing, oh, maybe we should try something virtual. Obviously, COVID pushed us into some different ways of doing things. Some are good, some are bad. But I think, for instance, the use of virtual meetings in some ways has improved an awful lot of way that charities work, for instance. And what I want to move on to now is this thing about governance and management. So trustee boards are around big picture stuff, not necessarily the day-to-day running of the charity. It's the long-term stuff, it's the big picture in mind. And particularly if you're trustees who are not involved in day-to-day stuff, you probably have that luxury to be able to do that. You know, if you're involved day-to-day, then your head's always going to be down here and worrying about the rota for next week, or going to collect some food from here, or actually who's going to pick up Mrs. Smith next week and stuff like that. Whereas trustees sometimes can look at actually, well, what should we be doing in 6 months' time or a year's time? So it's about governance and management. So governance is making sure things happen, and management is making things happen. So that's a very subtle difference. So the operational stuff is making sure things happen day to day, and governance is like that sort of scrutiny role, being that that friendly challenger about actually have things been done. And it's about setting and monitoring strategic aims and directions, you know, 1 year time, 2 years, 3 years. I know it's really difficult in the last few years to even have like a 1 year plan, you know, because things have been changing very much in society. But it's about trying to have that, where are we going? You know, our long term, where are we going? Where should we be heading? What are our priorities that we're trying to hit? What are the most important needs that we should be meeting? Have they changed from 2 years ago? And it's about make sure there's strong management of money, assets, and reputation. And again, this is about having good policies and procedures. If you're people like at U3A, then you've got a national organisation that's probably got quite good, well thought through policies and procedures that you can use. At CAN, we have lots of templates and so on we can share with you, and also we're available for one-to-one advice and support about bespoking it to your organisation. And that links in with having effective systems, safeguards and controls. Because of course, just having something written down doesn't mean it will happen. You've got to have ways of checking that things are happening and that you're getting reports back. And usually that obviously you're being told when things haven't worked, when things have gone wrong. Again, you might not see this on the screen so well, but obviously when you get to, you get a bit bigger copy. But I quite like this, I don't know, what do you call it? Is it an infogram? Is it a Venn diagram? I'm not sure. But it's a nice little diagrammatic view of the difference between governance and management from Mike Hudson. You know, basically the governance is about setting the vision, mission and values, and management is then working within the agreed vision, mission and values, and probably developing, you know, detailed operational plans to make that happen. So I think it's quite a good way of trying to see that subtle difference between it. And I've said a couple of times, for some very small charities, the trustees might also be the active volunteers doing it day to day. So might be in both camps, but you should try and separate, try to recognize the two hats that you have and when you're wearing which hat, so that actually governance doesn't lose out, which is what usually happens. You get involved and spend all your time and energy on the day-to-day stuff and then lose the big picture stuff, and then find out, for instance, you run out of money. And maybe, you know, a year ago you should have started thinking about a fundraising plan and which grants you are going to apply for, because most grant funding is going to look at 6 months lead time before you get a decision. Bit of good practice. I think it's good that you should have some role descriptions for trustees, but also any officer posts like chair, treasurer. So you'll get a handout about that. And it might also be good to have some sort of code of conduct. And again, I'll send you a sort of fact sheet about that. That's good in the sense of being able to set out the expectations of your trustees, and it gives you, I guess, a bit of ammunition in case you need to discipline them because they haven't been doing what you expect of them. I don't dare ask how many of you basically became trustees and then it became sink or swim. Basically, if you have a trustee and what happened was you then just came to a trustee meeting and basically probably sat there for the first 2, 3, 5, 10, thinking, my God, what's happening? I don't understand all this. It's a very common experience, and really good practices is that you should have some good induction. You should think about skills audit and appraisal and training. It doesn't have to be complicated, you know, a small charity can be very simple. And a nice way is to have a buddy system, for instance, you know, that a new trustee is paired with a more experienced trustee who can basically talk to them outside the meeting, you know, a bit before the meeting, go through the agenda and say, actually, well, you know, we've been talking about this the last 3 or 4 months. This is where we've got to. These are the issues. And then afterwards, you know, you can say, well, what was that about? I didn't understand that. And then they perhaps can give the context and a bit about the pros and the cons and so on. I think it's quite nice once a year for the trustee board just to step back. Although I say away day, it could just be 2 hours. It depends how, you know, some charities I know like have half days, some have whole days. They might have if they've got staff, they might have a mix of their trustees and their staff away. So it's a time just that you can step away and probably look at things like, you know, where are we going? You know, your objects, your aims and priorities. Another good thing to do is at least to look at your constitution once a year to see if it's still fit for purpose. You know, there is a charity that I have tried to get to update whose constitution hasn't been updated in 1956. So in some ways it's incredibly out of date legally, but you know, it's good always to review them every couple of years and to see whether they've changed. And actually, some of the CIO templates have just changed. So if you've been a CIO and you haven't thought about the new changes that the Charity Commission have just brought in, then maybe, you know, contact me or Becky. Ron.
Yeah, I mean, you used our vision for our charitable purpose at the start when it talked about the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
We do actually have a link outside of the United Kingdom. Is it easy to change that charitable purpose?
Yeah, you have to get Charity Commission permission before you can change it. So you have to justify why you want to change it, whether that's going to impact on the current beneficiaries. Are they going to lose out?
Yeah.
So again, you know, contact me about, you know, having a chat through about that. But it can be relatively easy. Yeah, as I said when we looked at the objects, is that, yeah, you mustn't do stuff outside of them. But if you do want to do work that's outside of them, then yeah, look at changing them. They very often can be changed. They can't be changed fundamentally, but they can be tweaked and stretched. But you can't completely change from being an educational charity, for instance, to one that's relieving sickness, for instance. Yeah.
Thanks.
There are some nice governance tools around. There's the Hallmarks of Effective Charity, which has got 7 sort of bullet points for you to think about the way you run yourself. It's a bit hidden on the Charity Commission website. There is a charity governance code, which is a voluntary code, which the Charity Commission, although it's been done by some of the big national umbrella bodies, the Charity Commission do actually expect all charities to use it or explain why they don't if things go wrong. Trouble is, it is still quite aimed at relatively larger charities. So when you look at it, you think, oh my God, this is a bit of a heavy beast. but it might be useful to dip in and dip out of. There are some tools which ask you some good questions about the way that you run your meetings, the way the decisions are made, the way you report staff, the way you recruit and induct trustees and stuff like that. So it can be a good sort of like prompt, I guess, for good practice. Charity ethical principles from NCVO are also another nice thing to look at. And there is something that an organisation called Directory of Social Change is the governance app. Now that's very, very good. It's a free app that any charity can log into. And what will happen is you put in the name of all your trustees, and they all have to fill in an online survey about how they think they run as a charity board. And it produces you a bit of a report about, you know, strengths and weaknesses, with some suggestions about how to improve. It's a very good thing to do if you want to do a bit of a belly button gaze about how well your trustee board is running. All free. Oh, sorry, my computer. Okay, there's some quality standards around. Again, they can be helpful to help you improve the way your charity runs. There's Trusted Charity Essentials, which is free from NCVO. Again, you fill out an online form and it comes up with a bit of a report about strengths and weaknesses and what to improve. If you actually want to go for something that's accredited, it's Trusted Charity, and you have to produce a portfolio, like all of these accreditation schemes, quality assurance schemes. You send in a portfolio, then an auditor basically does some desk-based research, will probably interview you and come up, but it'll cost about £2,000 to do it. So probably only for those charities that can afford to do it. There's another online system called the Charity Excellence Model, which is free. And again, it's got a series of questions for different aspects of running your charity, and then comes up with some sort of report. You know, look at those and see if they're useful or not. We offer, at the moment, we offer to do organisational health checks, so where we come in and do some surveys and questions and look at documents and come up with some report on strengths and weaknesses. I don't think anybody here tonight is looking to be a charity trustee. I put this slide in really for those people who are thinking about becoming a charity trustee. But I think it's useful for you as charity trustees to think about when you're trying to recruit people to become charity trustees and the sorts of questions or queries they might have. And you know, I think this is quite good for you to look at in terms of if you're putting together a recruitment pack about what it means to be, you know, a trustee of Age Concern North East or Dear View, that actually you'd have these sort of answers ready for them. So you'll get this as a handout as well. And I think I've got this suck it and see. I think it's always quite good if you're recruiting trustees that maybe you invite them to come to a trustee board before you appoint them. So there may be that they get to see how you operate as a trustee board, and that before deciding. Also, obviously, gives you a chance to see them as well. But that tends to work quite well. Okay, we're getting towards the end. So, any queries and questions that people have got at this point in time?
So I'm going to stop the recording, everyone. So but I would still refrain from any names or anything.